Hey everybody, in this video we're going to talk about sex and numbness. This is Dr. Diane Mueller, your libido doc, and we want to talk about why numbness happens with sex. Now, one of the things that can happen is we can get temporarily numb after a lot of stimulation with intercourse. So if you go through intercourse and you're done and all of a sudden you're noticing you have some vaginal numbness, that for some women is totally normal. Other women can actually feel hyper levels of sensitive where it's almost like, oh, I don't want to be touched there because it's so sensitive, right? So if you are experiencing, for a very short period after sex, you're noticing that you are numb, your vagina's numb, your vulva's numb, your labia are numb, which are your lips. If any of that's happening and it's very short, it's a 5-minute time period, that can be very normal. Now, other things can cause numbness. Some of it can be stress, some of it can be hormones, some of it can be pregnancy. So those are other times where having some numbness in the vaginal area can also be very normal. Now, what is not normal? One of the things that will create not normal numbness is trauma. So anybody that's gone through sexual assault, rape, anything like that, it can be almost this dissociative survival mechanism to actually have numbness in the vaginal area. I went through a sexual trauma. I was date raped when I was about 19 years old. It was a roofie situation. It was horrible. I have luckily gone through a lot of therapy process through it. But I know firsthand how much numbness can actually happen. And that was very normal for me, was that, oh my goodness, after all of this, it was almost like my body just shut down. And so if you're in that category, one, I want to be very sensitive to where you are right now, because if you're in that category of somebody that's gone through sexual trauma, even this conversation might bring up a lot. And really making sure you have somebody to help you work through this, to help you not feel like this is your fault, because it can be very hard to make sense of it. So having somebody to help work through that with you can be, and I think really is, pretty essential. But once you've worked through the emotional trauma of it, then there can be this residual numbness. And if this numbness is there because of trauma, or if it's there because, wow, you're just so stressed all the time and so overwhelmed, and your body has just decided not to send the signals to your vaginal tissue, that all of this can be healed. So the reason I bring up the trauma component is because what I want to be very careful about is some of the exercises I'm about to share with you. I want to make sure that if you're not going to be re-traumatized. So if you're feeling any sort of emotion come up right now as I'm talking, that is anger, sadness, and just full of emotion around this past, it's normal to have some level of emotion, forever. But if it feels really charged, where you're really feeling dissociated almost from this conversation, that can be a sign that you're just still in the processing of this trauma. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out for help, to get a good therapist that understands and how to work through this. Because some of the exercises that I'm about to describe, if you haven't worked through that charge, can actually be re-traumatizing. And I'm not a licensed clinical therapist. I'm not the person to talk to about that, but I want to make sure you have the support in this way, if that is needed. So if you feel okay, you've worked through the trauma, or you feel this numbness is coming from more stress or something like that, something that is non-trauma related, then one of the things we want to do is we want to start bringing the neurological connection back to our tissues. So one of the things that can happen is we can almost dissociate, where the nervous system signal to send information and communicate with that tissue. In this particular, conversation, we're talking about all of the tissue of the female genitalia, whether that's the clitoris or the vagina or the vulva, the labia, any of these different components of the female anatomy. If we are sending, if that nervous system component is not working very well, if the nerves are not sending that signal to the tissue and receiving information from that brain, to the brain from that tissue, that tissue will, kind of present as numbness. You want to consider basic nutrient deficiencies like B12, make sure that's not an issue because sometimes that can create numbness. But for many people, it's this nervous system component. So one of the things that I have found to really help is to start by making connections. What I mean by this is if I take my two fingers up like this and I put them together, I'm not going to initially feel like I don't have a lot of like huge sensation in these fingers. They're not numb, I can feel them, but I'm not like actively thinking about my fingers, right? But if I take one finger and touch it to the other, now I have a finger touching a finger. My brain is actually more aware of this connection. I can feel this connection between my two fingers. Same things if I put my hands together, I can feel this connection between my hands. So essentially that is what happens when we put our fingers inside our vagina, all over our vulva, and just breathe. What we're doing here is we're actually helping the brain and the nervous system reconnect the tissues. So one of the things you can do is you can actually put your hand just over your vulva, over the lips, or even internally, inserting a couple fingers internally, and just feel the tissue and move your fingers around to areas maybe that where you can't feel the tissue as much. So if you have your finger on, say, part of your vulva, let's say you put it on part of your labia and your one of your lips, your vaginal lips, then and you're noticing like, wow, there's not a lot of sensation here. You want to hold that spot and just breathe into that spot, breathe more feeling there. And for some people, this can bring up emotions, which is why I really encourage you to make sure you have a therapist to work with if you're doing this. But essentially what we're really doing is we're really bridging that neuronal connection again. We're helping your brain and the tissues find each other. So that can be a really great exercise. Another thing is just bringing more awareness. So one of the things that we see in sexual health is that many women have not even seen what they look like. So they've never actually looked at themselves in the mirror, looked at their vulva in the mirror. And one of the things that we see is there's a link with sex and healthy sexual activity with how women feel about the looks of their vulva. There's actually a huge link in research this way. So if we've never even seen what we've looked like, if we've never even looked at our vulva, it can be very easy to just kind of not pay that much attention to that part of ourselves, and that can further this neuronal disconnection. And we want to begin to realize that all vulvas are beautiful, and no matter what yours looks like, it is uniquely perfect, right? And so when you can actually start looking at your vulva in a mirror and just saying, hi pretty, hi beautiful. Mama Gina in her book Pussy a Reclamation talks a lot about this, and she's another wonderful woman in the world that I would strongly suggest you check out her work. She talks a lot about this in her work, and I think it's a really important point because of the research we see on basically how we feel and how vulvas look and how what sex is like. And so by looking at your vulva every day and saying, you're so beautiful, I love you, you're so pretty, literally talking to your vulva like that, what we're really doing is we're helping form more of a relationship and more of a neurological connection to this part of our body that has gotten disconnected if there's numbness. Numbness is a sign of disconnection. So the more we can do things such as telling this part of herself that she's so beautiful, such as doing some of these internal exercises to actually literally breathe more life back into the tissue, help our body find this tissue again, the more we can begin to get ourselves out of numbness. Don't worry about, there's some people that talk about vibrator addiction and that causing numbness. Vibrators do not cause numbness. Sometimes there'll be like a refractory period, just like after sex, where it's like, oh, there's a 5-minute period where there is a little bit of numbness because of the normalization of the nerves. That can happen with sex. That can happen with vibrators. It only lasts a short time. It is not what we're talking about here. You don't have to worry about that. Please check out other videos on this channel on vibrator addiction if you are concerned about that at all, because it does come up some in the community I work with. So that's it for this conversation on sex and numbness. This is a situation that can be healed. It is your body just talking to you. If there is trauma, take it from a trauma survivor. Like, there's hope on the other side. make sure you're working with somebody that can really, really help you with this. And please do subscribe to this channel if it's been helpful. There's information about how to work with me and how to take classes I offer on all things sex, lust, love, libido, relationships, and more. So check that out in the show notes. I'm Dr. Diane, your libido doc. I'll see you next time.